Captain James Rourke stood silently, surrounded by thousands of aliens watching from the shining crystal balconies of the Royal Xyrian Colosseum. His hands were chained behind his back, but his back was straight. His eyes were calm. Even here at the heart of the enemy's empire, he would not show fear. Above him, sitting on a floating throne made of silver and starlight, was Queen Azkara, the ruler of the Xyrian Empire. Her skin shimmered like polished glass and her eyes glowed violet. Her voice echoed through the arena like music and thunder mixed together. "So this is the human the rebels speak of," she said, laughing. "They call you a leader, a warrior, a symbol." She leaned forward, her voice now teasing. "But to me, you look like a tired man in a dirty uniform." James didn't answer. He had learned that silence often did more damage than words. The queen stood from her throne. Her tall, graceful figure floated down to stand only a few meters from him. The crowd fell silent. "You see," she continued, her tone playful, "I enjoy games, and I love seeing hope break in front of me." She smiled. "So I offer you a choice, little human." "A challenge," James raised an eyebrow. He didn't trust her tone. "If you can survive the arena of eternity," she said, spreading her arms wide, "I will grant you anything within my power. I will even give you me as your eternal wife." The crowd burst into laughter. Some aliens laughed with clicking jaws, others with strange whistling sounds.
Even her guard smirked. "But," she added, her smile turning cold, "if you fail, all of humanity will become mine."
"Your planet will fall. Your people will serve forever as workers and slaves. No second chance." James stayed quiet, then slowly smiled. Not because he liked the offer, but because he knew this was not a joke to her. It was a trap. Still, he also knew something she didn't. Humans are at their most dangerous when underestimated. "I accept," he said calmly. The queen blinked, slightly surprised. The crowd went silent again. The guards looked at each other. "You accept?" she repeated as if she hadn't heard right. "I do," James said. "But you better start preparing for a wedding." There was a beat of silence, and then the queen laughed loudly. It was a rich, echoing laugh full of mockery. "Very well, human," she said. "Let the games begin." Suddenly, the floor beneath James glowed and his chains vanished. A blue force field shimmered around him, and he was transported to the center of the arena. He looked around. Giant walls rose around him, forming a massive maze. The ground shifted. Flames burst from holes. Robotic beasts roared from the shadows. A voice filled the air. It was the queen's voice speaking to everyone in the arena. "This human now enters the arena of eternity. He will face 7 trials, each one meant to test his mind, his heart, and his strength. No species has ever passed all 7, not one." In a private chamber, the queen watched him through a floating screen. She expected fear, panic, or at least hesitation. But she saw none of those things. Instead, she saw James bend down, pick up a metal rod, and scan the walls calmly. He was already planning, already adapting. Strange, she muttered to herself. He doesn't even know what's coming. But James did know something. He knew that the Xyrians relied on fear to win. They broke minds before they broke bodies. Their arena was made to make people lose hope. What they didn't know was that James had already faced worse. He had buried friends, made impossible choices, lived with guilt, and he was still standing. Back in the arena, the first gate opened with a loud grinding sound. A wave of heat hit James as he stepped into the trial of fire. Giant spinning blades moved across the floor. Walls closed and opened in deadly patterns, and fire erupted at random. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for screams. Instead, they saw James roll, slide, and move with sharp precision. He used the rod as a counterweight. He calculated every movement. Within 3 minutes, he stood at the end of the trial, breathing hard, but alive. The crowd was stunned. The queen leaned back, tapping her long fingers together. She was no longer laughing. "He passed the first trial," one of her advisors whispered. "He won't pass the next," she said quickly, but her voice was less sure than before. James looked up at the queen's viewing box, met her glowing eyes, and gave her the smallest, most annoying smile he could manage. The queen narrowed her eyes. She had offered him forever as a joke. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she might have made a mistake. The arena shifted again. A deep hum echoed through the air as the ground beneath James Rourke moved like a living machine. The steel tiles flipped and rotated, forming a spiral path that led toward a large, dark gate. Thick fog began to spread across the field. The fire and blades from the first trial were now gone, replaced by complete silence. A soft blue light hovered above the next gate. The alien crowd had quieted down. Even Queen Azkara sat without speaking. Her glowing eyes were focused on James, curious now, watching him not as a joke, but as a question that still needed an answer. Trial 2, her voice finally rang out. The mind trap. James took a breath. He had read about Xerian technology from old rebel reports. He knew this next trial wouldn't test his body. It would test his memories, his pain, his past. The gate opened with a slow hiss. James stepped inside. Everything went black. Suddenly, he was no longer in the arena. He was standing in a narrow metal hallway filled with blinking red lights. The walls were shaking. Sirens were screaming. It was the Europa station. James knew this place too well. It was the human peace outpost that had exploded 5 years ago during failed negotiations with the Kralons. And it was also the place where his younger sister, Lieutenant Mira Rourke, had died. No, James whispered. He wasn't back in time. It was a memory, a trick. But it felt real. He looked around and saw the crew running, shouting orders. He saw the fire, the broken pipes, the sparks flying from control panels. And then he saw her, Mira. She stood just a few meters away, trying to help a wounded officer. Her face was young, calm, and determined. She didn't see him. James felt the weight of guilt return like a punch to the chest. He had been the one to send her into that room. He had made the call, and now the mind trap wanted him to relive her death again. But James wasn't the same man he was 5 years ago. He had carried that pain, learned from it, and used it to become stronger. He stared at the scene. The fire, the cries, the panic. He looked at Mira. He wanted to run to her, warn her, save her. But he knew this was not real. If he followed the trap's rules, he would stay in this moment forever, trapped in guilt. So he did something unexpected. He sat down, right in the middle of the hallway. And he spoke out loud. "You want me to feel pain," he said, speaking to the air. "You want me to blame myself again. But I already did that. I already cried. I already broke. And I already forgave myself." He looked directly at Mira as flames burned behind her. "You were brave. You saved others. You died like a hero, and I won't dishonor you by letting this place hold me prisoner." Mira paused in the memory. Her face turned toward him. Her eyes met his. Then slowly, the hallway began to fade. The sirens grew quiet. The fire went dark. The illusion cracked. James stood up as the false world around him shattered like glass. Back in the real arena. The blue light above the gate turned green. James Rourke stepped out of the fog. Alive, eyes sharp. The alien crowd gasped in surprise. Only 1 in 1,000 ever made it through the mind trap. Most went insane. Others refused to leave the illusion, but James had walked out on his own. Queen Azkara stood from her throne, arms crossed. She watched him with a new expression. It wasn't just curiosity now, it was interest. She whispered to her advisor beside her, "Did you see that?" He didn't fight the pain. He accepted it. The advisor nodded. "He understands himself. That makes him dangerous," the queen didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, speaking directly into the arena again. "Impressive, human," she said. "You faced a ghost of your past and survived. But this is only the beginning." James looked up at her. He was breathing hard, but his voice was steady. "2 down," he said. 5 to go." Her lips curved into a slow, careful smile. "I may have underestimated you." "You did," he replied. The crowd, once laughing, now watched him with serious eyes. Some were even cheering. A few Xerian children were waving flags shaped like Earth symbol. Somewhere in the crowd, an alien elder muttered, "Perhaps the human is not here to beg for peace. Perhaps he's here to win." James walked back to the center of the arena as the next section began to rise from the ground. Metal towers, glowing doors, and shadowed figures began forming the next trial. He knew it would be harder. He also knew the queen was no longer just playing. She had offered herself as a joke. But now, she was wondering if she would actually have to keep her word. The arena changed again. Bright blue lights flashed across the sky as large machines rose from the ground. The third trial was already taking shape. It was different from the last 2. No fire, no illusions, no traps. This time there were figures, 6 of them, walking slowly toward the center. James Rourke stepped forward. Ready, the voice of Queen Azkara echoed once more. Trial 3. The Broken Bonds. The crowd fell silent. This trial was one of the oldest. It was designed to test a warrior's loyalty, emotions, and decision-making. Most failed. Many refused to even attempt it. James looked closely at the 6 figures moving toward him. His breath caught for a moment. They looked like his old squad: Commander Reyna, Sergeant Malik, Private Oren, Lieutenant Park, and 2 others he had trained with years ago. All of them had died on past missions. Their uniforms, their voices, even their small habits, they were exact copies, artificial minds, perfect simulations. The real ones were gone. But these were close enough to hurt. One of them, Reyna, spoke. James, is this another mission? You look older. He didn't answer. Another. Malik laughed. Don't tell me you're fighting alone. That's not like you. James stood still. His heart was beating harder now. These weren't monsters or fire traps. These were his friends, his family, and the worst part, they didn't know they were fake. The crowd leaned forward, curious. They knew what was coming. To pass this trial, James would have to fight his own squad. He would have to kill them, but James had other plans. He stepped back and raised both hands. I'm not fighting you, he said calmly. The squad stopped, confused. You're not real, but your minds think you are. This is a test, not a war, Oren frowned. Is this a trick? We're under attack, aren't we? What's the mission? James took a deep breath. No mission, he said. You're copies, made by the arena to test me. He turned and looked at the sky, knowing Azkara was watching. I won't play this game. The squad began to circle him. Their faces were changing, becoming suspicious, almost hostile. Park raised her weapon. You've been compromised, James sighed. Here we go. He quickly ran toward a small pillar on the side of the arena. A control panel flashed on its surface. He tapped it with his hand, then pulled a small chip from his uniform pocket. He had studied Xerian tech during his time with the rebellion. Their simulations followed strict logic, and like all logic systems, they had limits. He inserted the chip. A burst of static filled the air. The squad froze in place for a second, then began to glitch. Their images flickered. James spoke directly into the system now. Override. Simulation pattern X9. Apply paradox protocol. The squad suddenly turned toward each other. Malik blinked. Wait, if we're all copies, who's the real one? Reyna's face changed. Then, if we're not real, why are we fighting? The simulation began to break. The squad dropped their weapons. James stepped forward. The point of this test was to make me choose between pain and logic. You wanted me to fight people I loved, but I won't. I'll break your system instead. The arena lights blinked red for a moment, then turned green. The simulation vanished. James stood alone again, the wind brushing past his hair. The crowd didn't cheer this time. They stood up, shocked. He had passed the trial without violence, without blood, without even running. In her throne, Queen Azkara stood slowly. She stared at the empty arena, then turned to her council. That shouldn't be possible, one advisor whispered. He rewrote the trial. Another said he didn't fight. He changed the rules. The queen walked away from the window and stood quietly for a moment. 3 trials, she said, and he hasn't broken yet. She turned to a screen showing a close-up of James's face. He looked tired but not afraid. Not weak, the queen narrowed her eyes. This human is dangerous, her advisor asked. Shall we end the games? No, she said. Let them continue, she paused. Then her voice softened, just a little. I want to see what happens next. James was led back to the center of the arena as the machines moved again. New shapes began forming, pillars, weapons, enemies made of energy and steel. He didn't rest, he didn't sit down, he just watched, thought, and prepared. The trials were far from over. But so far he had proved more than just strength. He had shown heart. And that, in the Xerian Empire, was something truly rare. The 4th trial began before James could catch his breath. The arena's floor split open with a deep cracking sound. Large stone pillars rose from beneath, shaped like ancient ruins. The wind howled. The sky above turned a shade of red as dark clouds rolled in. The entire place felt heavier, older, and colder. A new voice echoed from the walls of the arena. Not the queen's this time, but something deeper. Something mechanical. Trial 4. The Judgment of Balance. James stepped forward, eyes alert. He didn't know what kind of challenge this would be. Each trial so far had tested a different part of him, his strength, his mind, his heart. What was next? A platform rose in the middle of the arena. On it stood two tall figures. One was made of glowing white light. The other, a shadowy black figure with burning red eyes. Between them floated a scale, a real physical scale like one used to measure weight. The white figure spoke first. "You have shown wisdom." The black one followed. "You have shown danger. You have passed fire. You have rejected fear. But can you find balance?" James didn't move. He listened carefully. He could tell this was not a trial of fighting. It was a test of judgment, a moral puzzle. The white figure held up a glowing sphere. "This orb holds the power to restore life to a fallen world," it said. "One touch and a planet long dead will breathe again. But only one world can be chosen." The black figure raised a red crystal. "This shard holds the power to destroy an enemy fleet. With it you could win the war for Earth instantly, but it will cost millions of lives." The scale floated toward James. The orb and the shard hovered on opposite sides. "You may choose one," the figures said in unison. "But not both." James looked at the objects. His hands curled into fists. One choice gave life to others. The other protected his people, but through destruction. If he chose the shard, he might end the war. If he chose the orb, he might save another civilization, but lose Earth's best chance at winning. The crowd watched in silence. Even Queen Azakara leaned forward, watching closely. "This one is special," she whispered to herself. "Let's see who he really is." James closed his eyes. He remembered the cities on Earth that were still burning. He remembered the faces of the refugees. He remembered the smaller colonies on the edge of human space, places with children, families, farmers holding on to hope with empty hands, and then he made his choice. He walked toward the scale and took neither item. The arena buzzed. The figures froze. The crowd gasped. Queen Azkara stood up sharply. The scale spun wildly in the air, unable to balance. James looked up at the two figures. "This trial was designed to make me pick between death and sacrifice. But I choose to break that design." He pointed at the orb and the shard. "Why give me false hope or false victory? If you want to test me, don't force me into a no-win trap." He turned to the crowd now, his voice strong. "I will find a way to do both. I'll protect my people and save others. That's what humans do. We fight, we build, we try even when the odds say we'll fail." The figures began to glitch. Their shapes blurred. Then slowly, the scale stopped spinning. It began to glow. And then it vanished. So did the figures. A single word appeared in the air above the arena, glowing in golden letters. "Passed." The crowd broke into loud conversation. Some cheered. Some booed. Most were simply shocked. No one had ever rejected both options and still passed. In the royal box, Queen Azakara sat back slowly. Her hands were folded and her face was unreadable. "You broke the trial," she whispered again. "Not by force, but by will." One of her advisors leaned close. "He refused power." "No," she replied. "He refused to be cornered. That is even more dangerous." She looked down at the human below. What kind of man chooses a harder path knowing it might fail? James stood in the center of the arena again. The red sky began to fade back into stars. The pillars sank beneath the ground. The wind quieted. All around him, machines clicked and moved as the next trial prepared. He was tired. His body ached. But his mind was sharp. 4 trials done, 3 left, each one more difficult than the last. But James had learned something about this place. It wasn't just testing him. It was watching him, studying him, waiting to see when he would break. But what it didn't understand was this: humans don't break easy. The arena turned dark. Everything around James Rourke faded into blackness, like the whole world had disappeared. No lights, no sound, no walls, just emptiness. It felt like space itself, but heavier, more silent than death. Then came a voice, but not the Queen's. This voice was deep, cold, mechanical. "Welcome to Trial 5, the Mirror of Truth." James stood still, waiting. He had faced fire, illusions, memories, and moral tests. What now? What truth did they expect him to face? A spotlight appeared, and in front of him stood himself, another James. Same face, same body, same eyes, same scars, but something was different. This version of him wore black armor and his eyes glowed faint red. The clone smiled. So you're the version that still believes in mercy. James narrowed his eyes. I know what this is. The clone walked slowly in a circle around him. You think you're better than war? You think heart and hope will save your people? It asked. You've already seen what this galaxy does to the kind. James didn't answer. The clone stopped in front of him. I'm the version of you that wins. I take control. I strike first. I burn what must be burned. You hesitate. I think, James replied. And thinking gets people killed. The clone snapped. Suddenly weapons appeared in both of their hands, twin energy blades humming with light. The arena lit up just enough to show a flat, wide space, perfect for a duel. The crowd watched silently from high above, unable to shout or cheer. Even Queen Azakara leaned forward, eyebrows raised. This trial was not just a battle. It was a challenge of identity. The clone raised his blade. So here's the question, he said, tilting his head. To win, do you have to lose yourself? James activated his own blade. It hissed with energy. Let's find out. And they clashed. The two versions of James moved like lightning, both trained, both smart, both fierce. Their blades crashed, sending out sparks. They moved across the arena in wide, fast circles, testing, striking, dodging. But the clone was more aggressive. It fought like someone with no fear of death. Every move was meant to kill. You're holding back, the clone said, laughing as it blocked another strike. That's why you'll lose. I'm not here to kill myself, James shouted back. The clone smiled again. That's the problem. The fight continued. Blades clanged, energy burst into the air, and the ground shook with their footwork. But James started noticing something. The clone was stronger, yes, but it was also colder. It didn't adapt. It repeated patterns. It followed logic, not feeling. James took a deep breath, stepped back, and lowered his blade. The clone paused. What are you doing? It growled. James looked him in the eye. You're not me. You're a version of what I could become if I gave up what makes me human. He stepped forward slowly. You don't feel guilt. You don't feel hope. But that's not strength. That's emptiness. The clone shouted and lunged at him, but James sidestepped and disarmed it with one quick move. The clone fell to its knees, its blade skidding across the floor. James raised his weapon, but didn't strike. The clone looked up, breathing hard. Why not finish it? It asked. End me. James shook his head. Because I already passed this trial the moment I chose to spare you. The arena filled with a strange light. The clone faded into dust. James stood alone again. Above him, the sky turned bright and golden text lit up once more. Trial passed. The arena slowly returned to normal. The walls reappeared. The stars came back, and the crowd was louder than ever now, cheering, shouting, some even standing in awe. In the royal box, Queen Azkara said nothing for a long time. She simply stared. Her advisor beside her spoke softly. He chose mercy again. Against himself, she nodded once. He chooses the hard path, even when the easy one is open. But why? Azkara didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, because maybe he still believes that kindness can win. The advisor raised an eyebrow. And do you? The queen gave a quiet, bitter smile. I don't know anymore. Back in the arena, James wiped sweat from his forehead. He was tired, exhausted, but his eyes were still clear, his heart still strong. 5 trials done, 2 more ahead, and the last ones were rumored to be the most brutal. But now, even the Xerians were beginning to wonder if he might actually survive them all. And somewhere deep in her mind, Queen Azkara, who once laughed at him, now watched with something that felt almost like respect. It began with silence. James stood alone in the middle of the arena once again, but this time there were no weapons, no enemies, no strange machines rising from the floor. Just a flat open ground under a sky filled with quiet stars. For a moment, he wondered if something was broken. Then the queen's voice returned, calm, cold, and strange. Trial 6. The voice of the void. The words echoed in the sky. But there was no explanation, no warning. Suddenly, A soft wind began to blow across the arena, but it wasn't natural. It felt wrong, like it was brushing against his thoughts, not his skin. Then came the whispers, faint at first. So quiet they almost felt like his own memories. You'll never win. You're tired. They're all watching you fail. James spun around, searching for the source, but saw nothing. More whispers followed. Why do you keep trying? You think you're special, but you're just a man. Azkara is laughing at you. James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This wasn't an enemy he could punch or outsmart. It was something older, deeper. The trial was inside his mind. A wave of cold washed over him, and suddenly the arena shifted. He was no longer standing on solid ground. Instead, he was floating in space, stars all around him, but no oxygen, no warmth. He felt like he was falling upward, and all around him, the voices grew louder. They took the form of people he once knew, his mother, his commander. Soldier he had failed to save, they spoke to him. You should have died with us. You were never enough. You're not the hero Earth needs, just the last one they had left. James clutched his head. The pressure inside was building. His past, his fears, his guilt, they were all being pulled out and used against him. This trial wasn't about strength or skill, it was about faith, not in gods, not in powers, but in himself. He stood still in the middle of the cosmic storm. The voices screamed, the stars spun, and his own doubt tried to swallow him, and then he did something unexpected. He laughed, just a quiet, tired laugh. Not mocking, not proud, just real. He looked around the emptiness and said, "If this is the best you've got, then you really don't understand humans." The storm pulsed. James raised his voice. "You can show me my mistakes. I've made plenty. You can scream my doubts, I've heard them before. But I'm still here. I'm still walking." The sky darkened. "But let me tell you something," James said, his voice growing stronger. "We don't keep going because we're fearless. We keep going because we're afraid, and we do it anyway." He placed a hand over his heart. "My strength isn't in avoiding failure. It's in standing up every time I fall." And with those words, the whispers began to fade. One by one, the voices were silenced. The space around him cracked. Like glass breaking in slow motion, light poured in, and the arena returned. James dropped to one knee, breathing heavily, his shirt soaked in sweat, but he was smiling. Above him, the golden words returned once again. Trial passed. This time the crowd didn't cheer immediately. They were silent, watching him like they were seeing something impossible, something inspiring. In the royal balcony, Queen Azkara stood still. One of her generals spoke. He survived the void trial, alone, no tech, no weapon. Another whispered, "No Syrian has ever passed that trial without losing their mind." Azkara's eyes remained locked on James. He stood again slowly, like a mountain rising after a long storm. He looked up at her, didn't speak, just nodded once, and something shifted in her. For the first time since these trials began, Queen Azkara didn't see him as a fool, or even a threat. She saw him as an equal, maybe even more. She turned to her court. "Prepare the final trial," she ordered. Her voice was steady, but something in her tone was different. Quieter, curious, almost respectful. James was escorted back to the resting chamber under the arena. He sat on a metal bench drinking water slowly. He felt every bruise, every ache, but his eyes were clear. A Syrian guard, silent until now, looked at him through the force field. "You shouldn't be alive," the guard said. James looked up and smiled faintly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The guard hesitated, then asked, "Why do you fight so hard?" James thought for a moment, then replied, "Because someone has to. One trial left. The final one. And whatever it was." James knew it would be the hardest, not just physically, but personally, and far above him. Queen Azkara stared at the stars, wondering why her heart felt just a little heavier than before. The arena was silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. James Rourke stood alone in the center, muscles tense, eyes scanning every corner. This was the final trial. The one that would decide everything. His fate, the fate of humanity. And the promise of the Queen's challenge. The sky above darkened, streaked with strange colors as if the universe itself were bending to watch. A massive platform rose from the ground, and on it 2 objects appeared. A glowing sword and a crystal orb. A voice echoed through the arena. Not mechanical. Not alien. Azkara's voice. This is the last trial, she said. Her tone was calm but firm. To win, you must choose one. The sword grants victory over my empire immediately. The orb grants me willingly to you forever. One path leads to war and death. One leads to alliance and change. Choose wisely, human. James's jaw tightened. He looked at both objects. Each represented a different future. The sword could destroy the Xerian fleet, save his people instantly and end the war, but at a cost. Millions of lives, countless innocent beings would be lost. The orb could bring the queen to him by her promise, ending the fighting peacefully, but he would need trust. A trust he didn't know he could give even after all that had happened. He knew that every trial had tested something within him: strength, fear, loyalty, mercy, identity, and faith. This final test was no different. It was a test of choice, of his heart. James closed his eyes and took a slow breath. He thought of Earth, of his people, scared but resilient, waiting for a chance to fight back. He thought of the alien species the Xerians had oppressed, trapped under their rule for centuries. He thought of the queen, proud and clever, who had laughed at him from the very start. He opened his eyes. He reached for the orb. The arena buzzed. Sparks of energy ran along the floor. The sword trembled in its place as if alive, but he ignored it. He lifted the orb into the air. Light poured from it, washing over the arena, blinding, warm, alive. From the platform, Queen Azkara appeared. Her eyes widened in surprise. The crowd held its breath. Even the advisors whispered in disbelief. "You chose the orb?" she asked. James nodded slowly. "I could win by force. But that's not how humans survive. We fight, yes, but we also build. We protect. I won't destroy when there's a chance to create a better future." A silence followed. Then the orb released a beam of light that connected with the queen. She felt it in her mind, in her body, in her soul. For the first time in centuries, she saw clearly. The human before her was not just clever. He was different. A leader, a warrior. And more than that, a person capable of hope. Her arms slowly lowered. She stepped forward. The arena seemed to hold itself in awe as she approached James, not as a ruler commanding a trial, but as a person acknowledging another. "You've earned more than anyone ever thought possible," she said quietly. "Not just my respect, human, perhaps my trust." The crowd erupted, cheering louder than it had during any trial, but James barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the queen, who now stood beside him, unarmed, vulnerable, and yet commanding as ever. "You could have ended me," she said softly. "You could have taken the sword, destroyed my empire, and claimed victory." "I could have," James admitted. "But then the war would have continued in another form. More pain, more death. I didn't come here just to survive. I came here to win, without losing what makes us human." Azkara studied him. Then for the first time she smiled, not mockingly, but genuinely. "You are remarkable," she said. "A human. Not just a soldier. Not just a fighter. Perhaps the first human worthy of being more than a subject of this empire." The orb dissolved into golden light, wrapping around them both. The arena itself seemed to cheer, as if recognizing the choice, the courage, and the wisdom it had witnessed. James looked around. The Xerian crowd, once skeptical and mocking, now whispered among themselves. Some raised hands in awe, some cheered softly. Across the empire, unseen by him, transmissions were already sending the news. The human had survived, and he had chosen mercy over destruction. Azkara extended her hand to him. "Then, if you still want it, human, if you are willing to stand with me, I will stand with you. Forever, if that is your wish." James hesitated for a moment, then took her hand. "I am willing. Not because of a promise, but because we can build something better together." The queen's advisors looked on in shock. The soldiers around the arena lowered their weapons. Even the distant stars seemed brighter. For the first time, a human had not only survived the arena of eternity, but had changed the course of an entire empire. Not through fear, not through death, but through courage, wisdom, and hope. James and Azkara stood together as the arena dissolved around them. No walls, no trials, no tests remained, only the promise of what they could create. A partnership between Earth and the Xerian Empire, forged in trials, tempered by understanding, and strengthened by respect. The human had won. And in doing so, he had proved something greater than any weapon or strategy could. humanity, at its best, could rise above fear, cruelty, and even mockery, to shape the universe in ways no one had ever imagined. And somewhere in her heart, Azkara laughed, not at him, not mocking, but a quiet, real laugh, filled with admiration. He had not just survived, he had triumphed, and this time the universe would remember it.